In the eating disorder community, we have something that's referred to as a subjective binge. And when I say subjective binge, I mean something that may feel like a lot of food to a particular individual, or may feel like it was a binge to them in comparison to their normal intake. But when we actually look at what a binge truly is, it's not actually a binge. Now, I'll explain that in a lot more detail in just a second, but first let's talk about what a binge is actually classified as, what a true binge is actually classified as. Now, this is based on the DSM-5, or Diagnostic and Statistics Manual 5, for diagnosing eating disorders. But how they classify a binge is when someone eats an objectively large volume of food, but still within a discrete period of time. So still within about an hour or two, they're eating a large volume of food. Now, when they say large volume of food, and some of the research that's been done into binges, they're talking calories of upwards of 5,000 to 15,000 calories in one sitting. What also accompanies binging is a feeling of loss of control around food. Most often individuals know that they should stop eating. They want to stop eating, but they have this feeling of loss of control. They just can't get themselves to stop eating in that moment. Many times people eat a lot more rapidly than normal. And then a characteristic that's very common is feeling physically uncomfortable. And I don't just mean like some bloating or feeling really full, or you had Thanksgiving dinner, meaning that they're feeling severe pain. They feel absolutely terrible. But again, because of that loss of control, they can't stop eating. Now, binging is very severe and is definitely something to work on. But I want to classify the difference between binging and subjective binging, because subjective binging is something that's seen very often in the eating disorder community. So, a true binge is a large volume of food in a short period of time. Remember, something like 5,000 to 15,000 calories within about an hour or two. Just to give you an example, I've had clients tell me that a binge for them was a gallon of ice cream, 6 slices of pizza, 2 huge slices of cake, 4 donuts, a bunch of peanut butter crackers, and then like a whole thing of goldfish or something like that, all in one sitting. Now, a subjective binge is when someone eats more food than they're used to eating, but that feels like a binge, again, because it was more food. So I'll give you an example of that one. So oftentimes what I'll have, especially when people are battling restrictive eating disorders, is that they have gotten used to eating a very small amount of food at each meal, right? And that can be different for everybody, but just to give you an example here, I had someone who would skip breakfast, have a very light lunch, usually it was like a salad or something pretty small like that, and then would have a small dinner as well, and that dinner might be like a lean protein and some vegetables, but that was this person's way of restricting. And then one time this person went out to dinner. And for dinner, she ended up getting a pasta dish. She got like a pasta with red sauce and it had some meat in there. And it was a normal size plate. It wasn't like a huge one, but it was a normal size plate. And she said she finished almost all of it. There was only a couple bites left in the plate, in addition to having some bread that was on the table at the meal in the beginning. She classified that as a binge, because it was so much more food that she was used to eating in one sitting as compared to her normal sort of restrictive behaviors. Now, I'm not saying either one of these is good, but I want to point that out because eating that pasta out at a restaurant would not be a true binge. That's a perfect example of what we classify as a subjective binge, right? It was just more food than that person was used to eating. I see instances of like that all the time, right? Other times people tell me that maybe they had a normal breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like of normal size, volume, all those things. And then at night they were still hungry, so they snacked on some pretzels and had a couple of handfuls and classified those pretzels as a binge. Again, that would be a subjective binge. Now, I wanted to point this out today because what's interesting about a true binge and a subjective binge is in the research that they've done, it impacts individuals' lives the same. So even though individuals may not be truly binging, or even if they are truly binging, it impacts them in the same way. Meaning, most often people feel bad about themselves afterwards or the next day, oftentimes people feel like they need to compensate in one way or another. Now, I'm not necessarily meaning like purging or over-exercise. It could be those things, but even just compensating by skipping breakfast the next morning because they're upset about what they ate the night before. Or if the binge was earlier in the day, skipping dinner, things like that. Some sort of compensatory behavior. But it impacts individuals in the same way. So neither one is less valid than the other. I just wanted to point that out because I think when you do start to tell yourself that, having a couple handfuls of pretzels is a binge, it really does impact the way you think about food. And we want to work on restoring that healthy relationship with food. So if you feel like you're battling subjective binging, or you feel like, you went out to dinner and you would classify that as a binge, I highly recommend you bring that up with your dietitian or therapist, or if you don't have one of those two people, definitely get one and talk about that relationship with food and how you can bring back that enjoyment and not feel like meals like that are a binge or something bad that you need to compensate for. Guys, thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.